All right, welcome back to the Flipping Junkie podcast. Today, I've got a special guest, a good friend of mine, Seth Williams, joins us today. How you doing, Seth?
Hey, Danny. I'm doing good. Thanks for having me.
Great. Yeah, and you've been on before. I'll have to look at what episode it was, but it was early on, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was quite a while ago. It was a fun conversation, though.
Yeah, so I'll include that in the show notes. And we had talked about. You had mentioned this just a little bit before the show. You're talking about three things that we loved and three things that we did not like so much about the flipping business. So I'm sure that was a lot of fun doing that one. But today I wanted to get a little bit more into, how you got into the business, and you focus on land. So it'll be interesting and different, and, what you're doing now, what your goals are, and just go from there.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Awesome. Do you want to just start with, when you got started and how you got started in the business? And
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'll kind of just tell the story as I usually do. So it was about 2005 when I was in college, and, as many people do when they first learn about real estate investing, I was reading the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and fascinated by the book. I mean, it totally changed my perspective on a lot of things. And one of the things he talks about in that book and in many of his books is that he's into real estate, but he doesn't really get specific about like how you do it or what you're supposed to do or anything. So I was like, okay, well, real estate, I got to figure this out now. So it was, again, 2005, and I started looking on the MLS, trying to find houses I could buy to flip or to rent out or do something with. And I figured out how to, calculate the numbers and figure out what a good deal was. And if you remember, 2005, 2006, 2007, prices were pretty high, kind of like they are today in most markets around the country. And it was, I just couldn't find deals. Like, no matter what I looked at, I could not find anything where it would make sense for me to make an offer, because the cash flow just wouldn't be there. Or it would be just impossible to make a profit on flipping. And this is long before I knew anything about like how to make low offers and where to find motivated sellers. I didn't know any of that stuff. So I was pretty naive and just sort of clueless about how the whole business works. But it was still just frustrating me a lot, because I, spent hundreds of hours trying to look at different opportunities that never panned out and would never pan out. And so, graduated from college, got into the workforce, started working my job. And it was around 2008 that I took a course on the land investing business. And I learned about not only land specifically, why it makes sense and why it's actually a pretty brilliant way to invest in real estate, but also about a way to find motivated sellers through something called the delinquent tax list. And this is one of many ways to do it. It's not the only way to make it happen, but, it was kind of like these two components put together: the fact that it's land. So it's, a very simple type of property. There's nothing that's going to get broken, stolen, or destroyed. Like, you can sort of walk away from it for 10 years and nothing is going to go horribly wrong with it. Just a very simple type of real estate. And when you know how to find motivated sellers, specifically through the delinquent tax list, you can make offers to people that are like crazy, like offers for like $100 or $500 or $1,000, like the kind of money where like, I actually have that much in my bank account right now. Like, I can go out and buy that and own it free and clear. When I realized you could do that, it was like, whoa, this is like a game changer. Like, I don't have to get loans and mortgages and, overextend myself and, screw things up and ruin my financial future.
Right, so you can kind of take the chance without worrying about it being something that's going to end up putting you in the hole tens of thousands of dollars, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, if you're a house flipper and if you know what you're doing, the risk actually isn't that big, because you know how to do it and you know what to watch out for. But I knew none of that, and I knew that I knew none of that. And there's just a lot of risk in my mind with going down that path. But with land, I could set myself up with these deals so that, really no matter how the cards fell, like, I could make money from it. Like, when you buy something that's worth, say, $5,000 and you're paying $500 for it, it's not very hard to turn around and sell that thing without doing anything to it and still make money from it. And this, the exact same concept would apply to like a car or jewelry or any kind of a tangible asset. It's just that we're dealing with land here. That's the
Right.
asset class.
So what was the focus with the land? Like inner city lots or things out of town. What do you focus on? And was that what you focused on when you got started?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. What I started doing was really looking at counties that were not densely populated, but I would look at the counties that were surrounding the densely populated counties. So basically, for example, Detroit, Michigan. There's 3 counties that make that up. It's Oakland County, Macomb County, and Wayne County. I would not be looking in any of those counties to find land because, as in most big cities, especially Detroit, there are pockets of the city or very large pockets that are pretty rundown and nasty. Not the kind of place
Oh,
where.
Detroit, really? I never.
Did you know that? It's crazy. Although it's actually getting a lot better.
That's what I hear you.
Yeah. But anyway, the problem with buying land in in the armpit of town is that when it's a small residential lot, it's really only good for one thing, and that is building a new house. Like that's the highest and best use for it. But no, unless unless you have some strange situation, most people are not going to invest the money required to build a new house in the middle of a ghetto. Like that's just not what happens. So because of all that, it's just not an ideal type of property to work with. So when you're working in a rural county, though, a place that's like usually an hour or 2 hours away from a big city, so people can get there fairly easily, kind of have it be their home away from home type thing. Those are pretty good type of vacant land property to try to pursue. They're a lot easier to sell. And also because they're pretty rural and remote, they're kind of like out of sight, out of mind for most people. So like the people you're buying them from, like there's not this deep emotional connection to it. And it's not the roof over anybody's head. So they're a lot of times like totally cool with parting with that for a very, very low price. Because in their mind, especially if they have delinquent taxes, and you know that, they basically have just this big problem in their life. And they're kind of looking for an easy button. They want an easy way to get out of it without having to pay money. And when you show up with an easy button and you have a solution, you say, hey, I'll take this burden of your property. I'll give you cash for it. I mean, not everybody, but a surprising number of people will say yes to that.
Right. So what are you actually mentioning that that they have delinquent taxes in your marketing to them? Okay.
Yeah, I used to when I was getting started. I don't do that anymore. Especially if I'm sending out any kind of a postcard where it's like an open message where everybody can see it.
Right.
But really, just in any case, I found that it's not necessary.
They know they have the problem, right?
I can see in some situations it might be more compelling because you kind of know where they're coming from, and that's like leverage and negotiation, that kind of thing. But for the most part, the deals that I buy, there's not a lot of negotiation going on. It's like you either will take this or you won't. And
right.
You're basically throwing a bunch of junk up against the wall and seeing what sticks is what it comes down to. So,
well, I like the idea of not having it in the message because, when you do and they receive it, the thinking then, in my opinion, I don't know, I haven't had delinquent taxes and had this situation, so I can't say for sure, but I would assume that would put my mind in a hole. Who is this and what kind of research are they doing to find out about my problem? You know what I mean? Yeah. And you're thinking of the wrong thing instead of like, who's this guy that's interested in buying this land of mine? Mm-hmm. I wonder if he'd be interested, like, this would work out because I've got these delinquent taxes and, but he's really just interested in buying the land. So I wonder what kind of price he could give me. And when you come from I know you have a delinquent tax problem, I'm going to lowball you like crazy, which you probably might do anyway. Mm-hmm. It still seems a little bit less adversarial maybe, or, where you have them negotiate like that.
Yeah. And really, I think the delinquent tax list, tends to have a much higher response rate than most lists because like there is an active problem that all these people have in common. But some of the downsides with that is a lot of times the properties, well, I don't know if it's a lot of times, but more often than not, with other types of lists, the properties that are on this list or the people that call you back, it's kind of like a junk property, like something that for one reason or another, it has like a problem, like maybe it's landlocked or like it's too small to do anything on it, or it's trashed or something like that. And so it's just like a lot of the people that respond you talk to, like you don't actually even want their property in the first place because it's just not, it's not the right fit. So, I mean, another way to do this is you can just get a list of landowners in general that fit like the size requirements, the assessed value requirements that you're looking for.
Where do you get these lists from?
Well, there's lots of different places. The service I use is called Agent Pro 24/7, but you know, there's List Source, RealQuest, Data Tree, and there's lots of services that do the exact same thing. And the nice thing about that kind of list is you can sort of target more specifically the exact kinds of properties you want, so you don't end up messing around with the garbage that you don't ultimately want to buy. The downside, though, is that you don't know whether or not they have delinquent taxes, and I think the level of motivation tends to be less overall, so you kind of have to send out more mail to get the same number of deals. Not always, but that's usually what I've found to be the case. So, but there's just different pros and cons that go with different types of lists.
Right. So the delinquent tax part of it for a lot of these outlying counties, are you finding most of those online these days, or are you getting those from a service?
Yeah, there are some places that will say that they can give you a delinquent tax list, but I've found that it's usually the information is not that current, like not within the past few days or the past week. You know, with this kind of list, it's actually very important that it's totally up to date because this list is changing all the time as people lose their property, as people stop paying their taxes, as they pay their taxes off, that kind of thing. So whenever I get this list, I'm contacting the county treasurer directly and I'm asking them for it. And this is one of the harder parts of this particular type of list is that, first of all, a lot of times when you call the county, the first person you talk to has no idea what you're talking about. Or sometimes they'll just flat out say, no, we're not going to give you the list. And usually there are other ways to get it. Like if you talk to the county IT department, sometimes they can get it for you if the treasurer won't do it or can't do it. So, I mean, there's other ways to make it happen. But even then, after you get the list, a lot of times it's just a total mess. I mean, it's not formatted for you specifically. It's just like, you know, like the way the names and the addresses and the property information are listed out. It's going to take a lot of work for you to reorganize it and filter it so that you can upload it to a service like Click to Mail and send out the mail campaign. So, and you know, these are totally overcomable obstacles, and I've done it many, many, many times. It's just annoying. Whereas if you're getting the list from a list service, it's more like built specifically for what you're trying to do. So It's a little bit more pliable and easy to work with.
When I kind of like the ones that it makes it a little bit more difficult because you're going to have probably a tenth of the people that you're competing with mailing to the same people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Is there an issue with the delinquent tax stuff getting, you know, if you do it after the new year or something and they've got, you know, 30 days to pay it or however long they have to pay it, or where counties do split payments and stuff like that, where it'll show that they owe taxes, but it's not necessarily delinquent. Do you deal with that ever?
Yeah.
And how do you find out which ones are worth mailing to?
You kind of mean like the timing, like doing it too close to the drop dead date, or
right, where it's like the tax bill has gone out and they owe that money. And so, you know, I think here in Bear County, it's been so long since I pulled that list, but you know, if you do it at a certain time of the year, like right after the new year, and they still have time to pay it, but the bill is there, so it's unpaid. And so you're looking at unpaid taxes, not necessarily delinquent.
Yeah. There's different levels of that, and this kind of varies from state to state. Like, for example, in Michigan, you can have up to 2 years of delinquent taxes before the county will just take your property from you. So that means that every county has two different lists. You have the list of people that are 1 year delinquent, and then the list of people that are 2 years delinquent. And so basically, if you go for that list that's 2 years, that means that literally the next time this drop dead date rolls around, which I believe is March 31st, if those taxes are not paid, they're losing that property. So,
Yeah.
so they inherently have a higher level of motivation because like it's a big problem and they need to fix it now or they're going to lose it. Whereas the 1-year list, they still have another year plus before they lose anything. So, but you do know that they have delinquent taxes. So
Right.
it's better than just like a regular list of people in terms of motivation, but it's not necessarily like a dire situation yet.
Right.
So usually what I do is I go for that 2-year list and I make sure I've got enough time to actually put some deals together before that drop dead date occurs. And yeah, that I think the downside to that is that there's a higher delinquent tax balance that I have to pay off when I'm going to buy these properties. So that's a little annoying. But aside from that, the level of motivation is much higher. I just have to make sure that I'm factoring that delinquent tax payoff number into my overall purchase price and make sure it still makes sense with that included.
Right. Right. So do you guys have any exemptions in your area where, it's like over 65 or something where they can't really lose the property to taxes? Do you deal with that or filter that out?
I don't know of anything like that. So I don't filter anything out based on that, but not to say there absolutely isn't. I'm just not aware of anything. So.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think we have something like that here where if it's over 65, they won't lose it for property taxes or something like that.
You mean like if the owner's over 65
right.
years old?
Right. But I think that's probably where if it's homesteaded also, maybe homesteaded and over 65. But I would think the land would probably be a little bit different where you don't have something because you're not throwing somebody out that's got nowhere else to go that's, elderly. And
yeah.
So maybe that.
Yeah. And that's another thing that I've always liked about the land business is that, not only from a standpoint of negotiation, but also just like, I don't have to feel like I'm kicking somebody out of a house or something. Like nobody's, I don't want to say life, but nobody's home depends on it necessarily. It's kind of like an extra thing, and the person doesn't really need it in their life, and that's why they're letting it go. So it makes it a little easier to negotiate deals that way.
Yeah, like you were saying, it's not typically a negotiation. It's they just want to sell and you want to buy, and you throw out a number, and it's like whatever. I don't have a big attachment to this land because I wasn't born there. I didn't grow up there. Parents didn't live there for a long time. So how do you look at these land deals? Because, land comes in all shapes, sizes, locations, all that kind of stuff. Do you kind of have your set strategy of who you're selling to if you're not developing yourself? And what does all that look like? What's all this criteria for how your exit strategy works?
Yeah. Well, when I was getting started, and I think a lot of people have this in common, I was just excited to do a deal with anything. So I'd make offers on anything that came across my desk, and I just wanted to get experience. And there's a lot that can be gained from that, just in terms of understanding how deals work and that kind of thing. But these days, I've learned that bigger deals, like ones that make more money per deal, they don't come by as much, and you basically have to say no to a lot of stuff if you just want to do big deals. But ultimately, it kind of takes the same amount of work to do a big one as it does to do a little one. So I try to do a lot fewer deals and focus on those. So I'm usually looking, if I understand market values by acre in a given county, then I'm usually searching for properties that have a size that fit within the criteria I'm looking for. So that's kind of what I have my eye on. And, some areas are a lot more desirable than others. Like there are some counties in Michigan that are like super hot, like right on Lake Michigan. That's where everybody wants to go in the summertime. And other areas that just nobody seems to care about. And so you sort of have to understand like what's going to sell fast and what do you have to price stuff at if you want it to move, and are there any incentives you have to offer people, like seller financing, which can be a huge motivator, especially with land, because by and large, you can't get conventional bank financing to just buy land unless you're planning to like immediately develop it. Then you probably can. But if you're just going to buy land to just sit on it, banks don't really want to touch that. So if that's kind of what you're looking at, it becomes important that you either offer seller financing or you list it for like way, way, way beneath market value, like half of market value, which you can still make good money on. You just have to make sure you're buying it at like 10 or 20%. So,
Well, you guys can do land contracts up there, right? In Michigan.
yeah, absolutely. And that's another thing that's super important to understand based on whichever state you're working in, because every state has different types of documentation and laws and processes involved with seller financing. And some states make it really, really easy to do that stuff, and other states make it super hard. So you just want to understand what you're getting into if you want to go down that road.
Oh yeah, for sure. You don't want to be in a situation where you can't get a property back and you're having to pay taxes and take care of all this stuff while you're not receiving payment and they're not giving you back the property. So what do you find most of your buyers? Do you have, sort of like a typical buyer for most of the land that you buy and sell, and what are they doing with it?
Yeah. Well, most of the people that I end up selling to are like the end user. So the person who's going to buy it and use it to, go RV camping or something like that, or build a house. And the nice thing about those kind of buyers is that they typically pay more. But I think, in my experience anyway, they usually, like, the sale process happens a little slower. If you have an investor, like somebody who, basically just pays a marked up price that from what I paid, and then they're going to sell it again, those people, if you can find a good one, they can buy them pretty quick and sort of keep the machine moving, which is really nice. But if you're selling to the end user, it just kind of takes longer sometimes to find those people. But I'm usually just advertising on places like Craigslist and Zillow, and sometimes if I feel like it, I'll put it on a place like LandWatch and pay money for a listing. But usually, Craigslist gets some pretty good traction in Zillow as well. In my selling website, which is through Lead Propeller. That kind of thing can be super helpful too.
So, and you've given some great feedback too on some improvements for that we're working on. So I appreciate that for Lead Propeller sites. But how long does it typically take you to sell? I mean, is it a longer period? I mean, because you're talking about sort of outlying counties out of the bigger metro areas. Mm-hmm. And so what are the time frames? Do you end up with the property for a really long time?
Yeah, the longest I have ever held on to a property is 15 months. And that was a 14 and a half acre parcel in rural Alabama. Just sort of my classic area where it's an hour or 2 hours from a big city. And it can go slow, but it's not the kind of thing where you sit on it for like years and years and years on end. Like, if you got a price right, and if you're marketing it well, everything will sell eventually. You just kind of have to make sure those boxes are checked. And it's one of those things like, just this past year, I had a number of properties that I sold, and it took those about 9 or 10 months to sell those. And, when you're in the middle of that phase of, like, you listed it, you're waiting for the right buyer to come along, but they haven't come along yet, and you don't know when that day is coming, like, you can get a lot of fatigue and just, you'd think I'd like get over this by now, as long as I've been doing this, but like, it still bothers me when I'm just like, come on, like, where are the buyers? Why is this not happening yet? Right. It's you really just have to be patient. And it's one of my seminar membership site was telling me a while ago, if there's something you could like tattoo on your forehead, it would just be, it will sell. Just give it time. Like, just keep moving forward, keep doing what you got to do. And there's a lot to be said for having patience and just being consistent with your marketing.
Yeah, that is big. I think that it's really big, because you could get to where you're just thinking it's never going to happen, and you're going to drop that price, when if you just kind of hold on a little bit longer
because there's especially with land, like, a lot of times the key is to find the right buyer. Like buyer A may be willing to pay $50,000 for a property, whereas buyer B would only be willing to pay $10,000 for it. So you sort of have to find that person who like it's worth it to them. They want that. And, there's the backyard where I live is a perfect example. There's like 12 acres of like densely wooded land behind me, but I don't actually own it. My neighbor owns it. And if he were to ever put that thing up for sale, like it's essentially landlocked land. Like nobody can get to it. But I really don't want him to cut all those trees down and build a bunch of nasty houses back there or a mobile home park or something.
Yeah.
So like if he puts that up for sale, like I personally would be willing to pay a lot for that, but most other people in the world would not. So
Right.
it's sort of there's a little bit of luck involved, I think, but
Do you find that
basically
happening
just
a lot?
stand.
Do you
What's
find
that?
that happening a lot where people are buying like neighboring properties?
Yeah. I mean, I guess you have to define a lot, but I mean, something I always do when I'm trying to sell my properties is send out neighbor letters where I can, it's not hard to find the name and address of every adjoining property owner across the street and
That's
to the
smart.
side and behind you, and just send them a simple 1 or 2 page letter explaining that you are now their neighbor and you own the property right next to them, and just basically to contact you if they want to buy it. And I would say like 20% of the time, give or take, that will result in a sale. So it's not like it's always going to happen, but
That's a good percentage.
it's worth doing. I mean, I wouldn't just ignore that.
Are you putting signs out too on the property?
Well, I don't want to say never. I've done it a handful of times, but generally I do not. And I've heard that can actually help a lot in some areas, but a lot of the properties I buy these days are nowhere near me, so I can't get to them, and I don't feel like finding somebody to monkey around with that. So I just kind of skip that, and I'm still able to sell them, but I'm sure there are times when like that's never going to hurt.
Right. So you're not able to see all these properties. Are you buying all over the country, or?
Yep. Yeah.
And so you're not able to physically see them. How are you checking out these properties?
Yeah, there's a lot of different things you can do, which I think is harder to do if you're dealing with a house or any kind of a building with improvements, because you generally want to, either you or somebody you trust, you want to get in there and see it and like see what you're dealing with. With land though, I mean, it's just dirt, and everything you need to see, you don't have to get in anything. Like, so things like Google Earth becomes super helpful, especially because it shows the topography and like the elevations of the land. And Google Street View, if that's available, that can be really helpful. And even things like finding somebody on Craigslist or a local realtor to drive by and snap a few pictures for you. Things like that can go a long, long way. And if you can see it in person, I think that trumps everything. I mean, that's always the most helpful thing to do, but I wouldn't say you have to do that. Like, there's definitely ways to get around that. So yeah, that's kind of how I handle it.
Okay, so are you buying them cheap enough to where it's pretty hard to lose, or do you put any kind of clauses in your, contracts, or how do you handle any kind of case where, there might be something really weird with the property that you didn't anticipate?
Yeah. Yeah, there's all kinds of wordsmithy ways to, give yourself a back door. And usually, I'm saying something like the buyer has the right to terminate this contract for any reason at any point. Like, I'm not trying to trick them. I'm just saying outright, like, this isn't done until it's done. And I generally don't pay them a deposit or anything like that. So it's actually kind of like a loosey-goosey thing. Like, they could also walk away at any point with no repercussions. And sometimes that happens, but usually it doesn't, because there's not a lot of competition in the land business. Like, I'm not fighting with a bunch of other investors for the same property. And, this person generally does not have somebody else waiting in line. So it's like, if I don't buy it, it's not like they're going to sell it to 10 other people in the meantime.
What would be some of the things that you would be concerned about with a piece of property? Like, what are some of the, obviously like toxic waste dump, but how often are you going to have something like that?
Mm-hmm.
Are there any kind of things that you watch out for, that you look out for, just to be, something where, it's just not usable land for whatever reason? Maybe the slope is too steep or something. I don't know what.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great question. I actually have a blog post I can give you. Maybe you can link it somewhere,
Yeah, sure.
But it's called 15 Things to Watch Out For When Buying Vacant Land. And most of this stuff you are not going to encounter with the average land deal, but usually you'll see at least like one or two of them. So it's good to be aware of all. But some of the more common things, depending on the part of the country where you're working, would be things like, is the property in a flood zone, or are there wetlands on the property, like a swamp that you just can't see? Or are there zoning restrictions, like does the municipality specify what you can and can't do? And usually there's some of that going on in some way, shape, or form. Trying to think what else. Is there like, the topography of the property? Like, is the property on a cliff and you just can't see it when you're looking at a satellite map? And again, that's kind of where Google Earth comes into play, and it's really, really helpful with that kind of thing. And another thing is like access and utilities. Like, is there electricity running to it? Like, can you basically build a house there today? Is that possible, or is that going to be a problem if you want to do that?
Do you not buy whenever there's no utilities?
No, that doesn't necessarily disqualify it. It just helps me understand, like, what am I dealing with here? Like, what are going to be the challenges when I try to sell this thing? There's some properties that are like super rural and remote, and that's actually exactly what people want. Like, they want to live off the grid so that they're not relying on any, municipal power source or anything like that. So if you find the right kind of buyer, it could be just what they're looking for. But just things like that. And like wetlands, for example, that's something you generally are not going to have a lot of issues with on the western end of the country, just because there's a lot of desert and, just not a big thing. But over on the East Coast, that's a huge thing. In Michigan, it's all over the place. So like, you really got to be careful that you're not buying that kind of property.
Yeah. And so whenever it comes to valuing these, how are you determining value? Because land can be so different. Mm-hmm. How are you putting a value on these?
Yeah. That is one of the most challenging parts of the business, honestly. Even in my conversations with appraisers about, like, how do you guys value land? Like, what do you look at? And because really, like, when you look at how you value a house, it's usually fairly straightforward. Like, there are quantifiable things you can look at, like similar sales and the cost to rebuild the house if you need to, and number of bedrooms and bathrooms and things like that. And like, none of that is available with land. Like, there is no cost to rebuild it because there's nothing there. And usually the comps are few and far between. Like, just the data you need to make that decision is not around. So there's a few things you can do. I will say, in my recent, in the recent times that I've been looking for sales comps for vacant land on Zillow, I've actually been surprised. They've got, I don't know why, but it used to be that I would find like nothing, like maybe one or two comps in the county, and that's all I could find. But now I'm finding a lot more. So I don't know if their data is getting better or what, but it's becoming easier in some markets to find sales comps. So that's a good thing. But even when you don't have sales comps, it's a matter of finding like what are the similar sized properties and similar types of vacant land properties on the market that are listed for sale right now. And that is not the same thing as what it's going to sell for, but it at least shows you like, what is your competition? Like, what kind of listings do you need to look better than when it comes time to sell? Like, are you going to be able to price your properties lower than all of these and get better pictures than all of these and make it look like the obvious one to buy in the area when it comes time to sell it? So just sort of having an understanding of, what you're up against once you own this thing and it's time to sell it, that can be a really helpful thing as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I couldn't imagine, I guess, if like you get into it and you start doing it, you find what, you feel is going to be a good amount. And then you just kind of be a little bit more conservative, maybe on the buy. Are you using any formulas for figuring out what you want to pay for a property based on anything at all?
Yeah.
They're just wild guesses. It's like, whatever, I just feel like paying this much, so I'm just going to.
Yeah. It's, you can certainly spend a lot of time on this. Like, you can really, really analyze it to death. And I think it helps a little bit to do that. Like you might discover things that you might not have known about, but there's sort of this like diminishing returns thing. Like usually if you spend like 10 or 20 minutes looking at as much as you can before you make a determination, that's usually like the sweet spot for me anyway. Like if I spend more than that, I'm probably not going to come up with a much better idea after that. So, but usually what, I'm looking at similar price properties, assuming that those are all eventually going to sell for like probably 70% of what they're listed for. Sometimes if it's like a huge deal and I really want to make sure I'm not wrong, I might call 2 or 3 local realtors. And again, like realtors are not necessarily geniuses when it comes to land either. So like I would not necessarily take what they tell me at face value. I call a few of them and get a few different perspectives. But the benefit of that is, if I call a local realtor and just say, hey, let's pretend that I own this property and I want it to sell in the next 6 months. What do I need to price it at to make that happen? And the benefit is they are actually in that market working there every day and I'm not. So even though their answer might not be like perfect or the smartest answer, it's probably going to be better than just my own gut feeling. I'm getting some kind of outside input on it. So that kind of thing can be really helpful as well. But, usually when I zero in on whatever I think the market value is, it's extremely rare that I pay more than 20%. Usually it's like in that 10 to 15% of that number is what I'm making the offer for, including any taxes I have to pay off or closing costs. So it's a very, very, very low offer. And as you can imagine, a lot of people do not accept it, but that's okay. I'm looking for that small percentage of people that will say yes.
Yeah, that clears things up a lot because I'd feel a lot better about, not knowing exactly what that's going to sell for.
Mm-hmm.
If you get it that low, if you make what you thought it might sell for, great. But if you don't, it just means you're making less than you hope to, and that's all.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. That's awesome. Wow, we've already been talking for quite a while. You had mentioned, as you've done more and more, because you have the blog, retipster.com. You've got a membership site, which I'd like for you to talk about in a little bit here. And you're doing all of this stuff. And we were actually in a small mastermind group together too. So I know you're doing a lot of things. And you had talked about, hiring a VA. And I wanted to see what that looks like for you and how that's worked out for you, what kind of tasks you have them do.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's, I don't know why, but I just have struggled in this department for a long time, just trusting other people to handle anything in my business.
I get it.
I mean, and in some ways it's really like, as much as it kind of stinks when you're getting started because everything is slow and nobody knows about you and it's just things are kind of slow to pick up. There is something that's inherently nice about that because like you can do everything and make sure it's all being done right, or at least to your satisfaction. And, I handled it that way for a long time. And really for the past couple of years, like it just sort of hit this point of like, okay, like this is seriously getting in the way of me living a healthy life and growing my business. And so I basically have had to learn to start trusting people. And, in addition to hiring out one-time tasks, actually getting like a full-blown virtual assistant who's there on a regular basis to do things like answer emails and, edit stuff and, basically just set up appointments for me and handle a lot of the stuff that I used to do myself, but it wasn't like a monetizing thing. Like it was kind of just, like it didn't keep me in the revenue generating activities. So that's kind of what she does, is allow me to focus on things that will grow and produce income in some way. So, but yeah, I found her on Upwork, and yeah, she's the nice thing about Upwork is when you're hiring for ongoing tasks, you can really handle like all of the payment through there. So like that's how I pay her, and you can track what they're doing and like actually take screenshots of their computer so you know what's going on. And it's just a really nice platform to use for that kind of thing. And I have struck out before on Upwork. Sometimes I've hired people that have not worked out. So it's not like you're guaranteed to get the best person ever, but it's usually it's not a bad place to start searching for that.
You have any tips for who to look for? And because I think that's where something I struggle with a lot of times when I think, okay, well, I have this task I need to do. I'd rather just get a VA on Upwork to do it for me. And I spend so much time trying to describe what I'm looking for so that I get the right person.
Yeah.
And I end up feeling like, oh, I should have just done it myself, which is not good thinking, because then next time I need to do it, if you already had somebody that you used before. Do you have any tips for that? I don't know if that's such a wide open question that it's kind of hard to answer, but
yeah, well, no, it's a good question. I totally get that. And I've thought the same thing on many occasions, especially when it's like a one-time task. For what I was hiring for, it was going to be a, ongoing, basically an employee, but I'm just paying them through Upwork. So there's no W-2 necessarily, but, I basically just thought long and hard about what exactly I wanted and who I was looking for, and sort of came up with the ideal candidate, and, just had that description there. And in the description, I said, please include a video of yourself, like answering these questions. And, a lot of times, and maybe it's just because I've been blogging for as long as I have, I don't know, but, you can sort of tell by the way somebody writes, like, whether English is their first language, how well they communicate, almost like a level of competence in a way. Maybe that's not the best judgment of that, but I don't know. I've found it to be relatively accurate. But so yeah, I had probably like a dozen people that responded, and several of them I could just tell by the way they were writing with their little proposal that, like, yeah, I'm not even going to talk to you. Like,
especially if they're going to answer emails for you and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. Like, essentially, like they're an extension of me. Like, they need to be able to think a lot like I do. And, it's probably not reasonable for them to like know everything I do, but just like understand what kinds of things are good opportunities, or, things I'm interested in, and respond on my behalf. But yeah, anyway, it's, so what I did was I just asked for people to give me that kind of information, and, write a little message and record a video. And, that was really, the video was actually like a big part of it, because I could sort of see their personality and like how they handled, how they conducted themselves verbally. And, I don't know, maybe it's not right to like judge a person based on that, but it ended up being like really reliable and accurate in my case. I thought that was a really good way to get to know sort of who I was going to work with. And then of course we had like a video Skype call before we actually made it official. But, yeah, she's been doing a really good job, and she's a great writer and speaks 3 languages. And,
wow.
Yeah.
And do you mind my asking how much you're paying, and whether it's 40 hours a week, and what country she is from?
Yep. So before, it's I'm paying her $20 an hour, which is actually like quite a bit more than most VAs that you would get in like the Philippines. There's a few reasons behind why I'm more than happy to pay that. And it's actually like, I've known VAs that charge like $85 an hour. And, I think there's like different tiers of VAs you can get. Like, if you want somebody who's just going to like, post stuff on social media for you, and it doesn't matter when they do it or what they say, like they're just posting links or like data entry. I mean, that can be done for pretty cheap, I think. And you don't need to pay $20 an hour for that. But when you want somebody who like can think with a good deal of intelligence and critical thinking and write well, and they're in your same time zone, so they're active and doing things the same time you are, like that's worth something. And especially like when you think of like for what I need a VA for, like helping them understand, like, how do I think, and what kinds of things would I say yes or no to, and what does good content look like, things like that. Like, it takes a long time to train somebody for that, and when they know it, and when they start thinking like I do, like, that's worth something. And I don't want to lose that. I do not want to start over from scratch. So you really want to pay them enough so that they're not just going to like pull the plug and leave when something else better comes along.
Right.
So, $20 an hour, I think, is a very fair price for that. And right now she's working like 20 hours a week. And And I should probably up that, honestly, to like 30 hours a week. But that's another nice thing about Upwork, is that you can set limits per week. Like, this person can work up to X number of hours, and then it'll just basically cut them off. Like, they can't work any more than that. So if you are trying to stick to a certain budget, it will basically just kind of force them to stick to that.
Yeah. I like how they have the whole thing where you can allow them to do manual hour entry too. Where if they're doing stuff that's based on the computer, when they're working, it's going to track all of that, and they won't allow them just to put in, hey, I worked 2 other hours. If you want to see that they were actually on the computer working for those 2 hours. Yeah. It's pretty nice. But so is that US based or somewhere else?
She is in Orlando, Florida. Okay. But yeah, she's actually a Canadian citizen, and she lived in Nicaragua for a long time. So she speaks very, very fluent Spanish, and I think French too. And I wasn't even looking for that. That's just kind of a added benefit. So.
Well, that's cool. I'm glad that's all. How long have you been working with her?
I think it's been since January of this year. So it's coming up on like half a year now.
Wow, that's great. Yeah. I've gotten to that point too. Everybody kind of hopes like, I'm going to find the $3 or $4 an hour, person and get all this great work. And, it's the reality of it. If you have the time to train and weed through a bunch of, people to get the perfect person, maybe you can find that. But I just got to the point where it's like, I don't have time for that, and I don't want to mess with that. I'm just going to pay more, find the better people, and have stuff done right the first time. Because nothing's worse than having work done and then finding that you can't even use it, or you're just not happy with it. It's not up to your standards, and you just wasting time. But
if I hire somebody that I want to do right by me and do good work and have high expectations, I mean, just from a leadership perspective, like, I need to start by doing right by them and paying them well, and really just being a blessing to them, and not like somebody who's resentful about doing this kind of work and only getting paid X number of dollars when they're worth more and that kind of thing. Like, let's just skip all that. Like, I'll just pay you what you're worth and what I think is a really good wage. And hopefully they're happy to do that.
Well, and if they're replacing you on a lot of that stuff too, thinking like, if I was doing that, what is that worth? And I'm sure your time is worth a lot more than $20 an hour. So it's a no-brainer. Like, at that point, if they're actually able to save you all that time.
Yeah.
Awesome. Seth, this has been a great episode. And I'm going to link several things in this. You had the blog post about the things to look out for when buying land.
Yeah.
And it'll be on the show notes page, flippingjunkie.com/112, flippingjunkie.com/112 for this episode. And if you would you mind sharing a little bit about your membership site and what that entails and how they can find out more about it?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, the membership site, I put that together back in about 2.5 years ago now, almost 3 years. Wow. It's basically just a website where people have been asking me for a while to put together like a course about land investing, just really explaining the whole thing from start to finish. And so I did that. I put together a 12-module course with tons of video content and documents people can download, all my templates and everything, and made it into a membership site so that there's also like ongoing monthly coaching calls that I do with people that are recorded. And there's a forum there that I participate in. And it's kind of just a community for people who are looking to learn about the land business and grow their land business. It's a resource for people to use for that, if that is what they're looking for. So that's what the site is all about. It's the RE Tipster Club. So just retipster.club is the URL. And it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, make sure you don't put REI Tipster, because even to this day, I still type that in first for some reason. I hope you own that domain.
I actually did buy reitipster.com. So I got that one.
retipster.com. All right. And we'll include a link to that as well in the show notes, just in case anybody's driving and they don't have a way to write that down. So we'll have that there. flippingjunkie.com/112. Thanks again, Seth. And is there any other way people can reach out to you if they would like to? What's the best place for them to do that?
Yeah, good question. Probably on the blog, I have a contact page. That's one way you can do it. I'm also on Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn. And so there's all kinds of ways you can harass me if you want to.
That's awesome. All right. Well, have a great day.
You bet. Thanks, Danny. Appreciate it.
Yep. Talk to you later.
See ya.